You? I don't know.
Space open up. Sure. Alright. There it is. I marked my turn.
I know.
And I found that out midway. I had to turn around and go back and like layer up because it's the wind and I was coming from south, I was coming north, and it was just like smack against it. Yeah. Belmont and Lakeshore. So it's pretty intense wind. I didn't really walking around. You don't notice when you're on the bike. It's magnified. So once I kind of got into it, it's like I actually had nothing to cover my ears before, so I and then I realized I was running late. The thing is, when you're riding and it's cold and it's wind, it's okay if you're not worried about timing. But then when you add that rush thing, yeah. Well, they said this thing about doors locked and that stuff. So then I'm riding and I'm freaking out. Crazy. This is very like 60s style. The idea of like Miami. Tara?
I want to say that was like almost 3 years.
She owned the same owner for a long time? It's so cool. This place still exists.
Oh.
Yeah, one of the guys was playing at CSO. I went to high school.
I know you're talking. You're one of the ones that's good at math.
How did you know about it? Friend from New York? Do they do some of this similar kind of stuff with the old time stage? Is it kind of similar to
It's a well organized different levels.
I took a
Yeah, but it wasn't escalated.
yeah, fair enough, but they it's probably more unusual.
Why?
Yeah, it's quite different than it was like 20 years ago.
Were you born in Michigan? Did you grow up as a kid there? You ever heard of Symphony Shoots? Does that ring a bell? That was a big, that was my grandfather, and then my dad went up his business. He had stores all over Michigan. Yeah.
That's the year they were founded.
Is that you know what? I think they.
Downtown? Oh, was there?
They must have. I mean, I don't know that for sure because Grand Rapids was a larger. I'm pretty sure they did. But Saginaw, they definitely did. They had a strong Saginaw. Grand Rapids, they must have. That doesn't. That one doesn't go over my head. Yeah, that's it. Grand Rapids is one of the largest. I mean, they definitely would have had a store there. Probably one of those. But Saginaw really stinks. Yeah. That was like the tail end, right around that is when they sold the business, and then they sold it, and then it Grand Rapids, I want to, on my list, at some point go to the, what's it called, the major gardens, or higher gardens, yeah. It supposed to be really,
How much compared to like the garden? Well, I go to Garden Park.
After the support,
Conservatory.
the site is still up. Yeah, I started telling you about that.
Grand Rapids, that's, they're owned by the DeVos family, right? They're very conservative politically, but they're very philanthropic.
Personally,
At least they put money back into their community.
it's like a,
My family is
oh, Somerset. But yeah, except for
My sister, so north, that's the north. Oh, you know where Maple Miller is? That's where my sister, that's where they live. Right across the street from high school. There's a brand of Sky.
It's going to be both. They haven't put the right field one up yet, but they built the one.
So where in Chicago you guys go?
Walls one. It's gone. It's gone, yeah, you noticed it yesterday.
How long have you been in? One of you teaching here?
Hey guys, we're gonna get this this whole thing started, okay? So first of all, thanks so much for coming out. This is like our inaugural event. This is the first time we're using this stage. We built a stage, and people have come to play on it. Like it's huge. So thank you, all of you, for coming out tonight. And we also want to, our sound technician here, Tara. Yeah, thanks so much. So yeah, we wouldn't want that playing over. So a couple of things. If you have cell phones, let's turn them off. right? For you people right here, really close to this microphone, if you don't know, we're live streaming this across the world, right, on the interweb. But if you're sitting right here and you whisper maybe to your friend, this sucks, the whole world will know how you feel, okay? So try not to do that. The microphone's right here for all of you people to know. You might want to, just keep that in mind.
Will do.
Right, full disclosure. Okay, so one of the reasons we built this stage is our whole mission at Flatts and Sharpe is to create community through the arts. And we put on shows with our students all over the city, and I'm tired of going all over the city, we can do smaller, more intimate events right here in our store. And hopefully some of you have talked to each other and made some new friends, and that's part of what music's all about, creating community and inspiring emotion. And hopefully with the community part of it, you'll recognize each other going to the grocery store or walking down the street or at the beach. And when we start to recognize each other, it becomes a safer, happier place to live, So that's sort of hopefully a byproduct of what we're trying to do here. So I think but I did forget. I have something for these guys. You guys are all recipients of the Flatts and Sharpe coffee mug that we just so I'll be handing you all, anyone that plays the stage, you'll all be getting a coffee mug for playing, and the name of the stage is The Stoop. So this is The Stoop at Flatts and Sharpe. So you all get a coffee mug for playing The Stoop. And next month, I should let you know too, if you're interested, we have a mailing list for these concerts. Next month, it's Jake Willis. He'll be up here on the 15th. And if you don't know who he is, he's nothing but good times, this guy. I know you know who he is. Just great. His voice is amazing. His pitch is phenomenal. And he plays this huge acoustic flying V guitar. And he just kills it. He's so much fun. And then the month after that, Deep Fried Pickle Project, joke band out of Michigan will be here. And that's certainly more of a, and they're all kid-friendly. All the events will be kid-friendly, early, so I can be in bed by midnight, not leave my house at midnight, right? And it's all BYOB. So with that, could everyone just please give a big, warm round of applause to the Malarme Quartet?
We'll tune in and talk. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to introduce you to myself and my colleagues. My name is Max Ramey. I play viola, slightly larger version of those things. And my friends from Shanghai, China, Ryan Peng, playing violin. From East Brunswick, New Jersey, Melanie Kopczynski. And from the great metropolis of Hillsdale, Michigan, Lauren Brown is playing cello. I'm from Detroit. We're playing a piece that we've spent a lot of time with, partially because we've found that it's very difficult to really come to terms with it, both in terms of what it asks us to do technically and what it asks us to do emotionally, and partly because we've really come to love this music. It's a quartet by a Czech composer whose name was Bedřich Smetana. And as I say, we've really come to enjoy it, and we've really worked hard on it. I'm delighted to see some kids in the audience. Do you guys play instruments? Great, what do you play?
Viola.
You play viola. She looks so What do you play?
Violin.
Violin. Okay, can I ask you a really dumb question?
Why do we do this? Why do we work so hard, learn this music, come out here, play in public, and these people come out and they've got to try to figure out how to park in Rogers Park on a Sunday night, and they all come out here and they listen to us? Why do we do this? It's fun. It's fun. That's a real good start. And is it something beyond fun? Does anybody have, any other guys have a? To make people happy. That's a wonderful answer. Because, you know, it's very interesting with music in that, let me just say this, I've found, and I'll bet a lot of you found, that one of the most lonely feelings in the world is when you're with a group of people and you feel something and you don't think anybody else is feeling the way you feel. This happens sometimes. And the incredible thing about music with groups of people is that it brings us together. It brings us all feel like we're experiencing the same thing at the same time. We've had a congregation and we have this experience we're sharing. And you know, if you think about it, whenever there's any congregation, any gathering of people at a church, at a baseball game, at a party, any place, there's got to be music. You can't have those things without music, because we need this feeling that there's this experience that we're all sharing together. And this piece we're playing now is actually, even though there's not a word being said, there's no singer, it's a very specific thing that Bedřich Smetana, the composer, was feeling, and he wanted everybody to experience together. Because this piece has a title, and the title is From My Life. This was the story of his life, his autobiography, and instead of telling it in a book with words, he told it in a piece for 2 violins, viola, and cello. So before we play the piece, I want to tell you all a little bit about Bedřich Smetana, about his life, and then we'll talk about certain things in this music where he really illustrates his experiences. He was born not quite 200 years ago in what is now the Czech Republic. I call it what is now the Czech Republic because the time he was born, there was no such thing as the Czech Republic. There were a bunch of Czechs living in this land about half the size of Illinois, and they were dominated by the Austrians. There was an Austrian Empire. And the Austrians thought they were doing the Czechs and all the other little countries they were subjugating a tremendous favor because they thought that they were really going to help these people by making them less like themselves and more like Austrians. So the first thing they did was they said, you know, you speak this Czech language, it's not a very good language. Our language, German, is much better. So in school, they were only allowed to study the German language. Bedřich Smetana, when he became an adult, could barely speak his own language. That the Czechs were told, you know, your music's not very good, your folk music, much better off with Austrian music. Your stories are not very good, much better off with Austrian stories. And whatever you do, don't criticize the Austrians. And as you can imagine, the Czechs were not really very happy about this. And when Bedřich Smetana was a young man, about 20, there was this movement to throw off the Austrians and become an independent country. And they actually, Smetana himself was a very physically unimpressive guy. He had been sick as a kid, and he was skinny and not very strong. But he took part in this. He manned these barricades on the bridges over the river in the capital of Prague. And it didn't go well. I mean, it's, you know, you had this tiny little country against this vast empire, and in Disney movies, sometimes the little guys win, but in life, not so often. And so the Austrians subjugated them and totally wiped the floor with them, and they were again under the Austrian thumb. And while this was going on, Smetana was also involved in another huge conflict, in another huge battle. And this one was not politics or war. This one was about the nature of music, what makes music beautiful. It was a huge argument in Europe at this time. Smetana was a brilliant young pianist, and he wanted to become a great composer. And there were very conservative forces in Prague, in the Czech Republic, and all over Europe that said, there's rules about what makes music beautiful. There's certain things you got to do. For a symphony to be a good symphony, this has got to happen, and this has got to happen, it's got to be in this key, it's got to be in that key, these notes go together, these notes don't. And there were a bunch of people like Smetana and like the famous composer Liszt, the Hungarian composer, Berlioz, the great French composer, who said, no, we don't need to follow these rules. Music has to tell a story. And wherever the story goes, that's where the music should go. And so Smetana was writing music in this new style, and there were very powerful people that didn't like it, and it didn't go well for him. There were very powerful critics that said, this Smetana music, it's not following the rule, it's terrible, it stinks. And he wasn't able to get good performances at the big venues in Prague, the capital. And so that was kind of strike two. They failed to overcome the Austrians, and his music was not going well. He had a third strike that was, if anything, even more horrible. He married his childhood sweetheart, whom he very much loved. They had a bunch of daughters. 3 of the daughters and his wife came down with tuberculosis and eventually died. And he just retreated. He said, I gotta get out of here. And for a time he went to Sweden, to the city of Gothenburg, Sweden, and he opened up a school for piano there, and he did very well for a while. But a couple things happened. He wanted to come home, and the Austrians made the mistake of, instead of beating up on the Czechs, picked on someone their own size, the Prussians, and they lost a war. And now they had a lot less power, and a lot less ability to keep themselves under the, keep the Czechs under their thumb. And so things got freer back in Prague in the Czech Republic. And Smetana got this great idea. He figured out a way to fight these 2 battles at the same time. He was going to write this new style of music that tells a story, and the story he was going to tell was the story of his people, of the Czech people. And he was going to use Czech folk music traditions and Czech story traditions and the Czech language and the Czech rhythms. And the first thing he had to do was teach himself to, in his 20s, he taught himself to really speak Czech. He made himself read it and read it every day. He'd find people that spoke it better than he did. And he wrote first a bunch of operas. And for the first time, there was an opera in the Czech language. This was not done. Opera was a very serious art form. It had to be done in the important languages like Italian and French and German. But no, he wrote, his most famous opera was called The Bartered Bride, and it was a Czech story, and it was in the Czech language, and he used Czech dances and Czech rhythms. And this was huge. The Czech people were able to go to the opera and hear this brilliant, beautiful piece of music. And for the first time, they could think, hey, our country, in its way, is just as great as all these bigger countries. We are capable of greatness, we are capable of beauty, we are capable of taking our place eye to eye with any people in Europe. And this was so huge, because before they could win a battle militarily, they had to win a battle within their own hearts, think of themselves as a great nation. So they still think of this to this day as the first step to when the Czech people really became a nation, although it was many, many years before they actually became an independent country. He also wrote a bunch of pieces without singing, just for orchestra, that he called tone poems, which told the story of the Czech people. They were called From My Land. And some of them were things that happened in Czech history, some of them were Czech folk tales, some of them were about the land itself. The most famous one is called the Moldau. It's about the Great Czech River. And they're still beloved 150 years later throughout the Czech people. But as this was going on, he had a horrible tragedy happen to him again. He had, maybe you guys know what happened. Do you know what happened to Beethoven at the end of his life? The great tragedy that happened to him? Do you guys know about this? Beethoven, the great composer, went deaf. He was not able to hear. And the same thing happened at the end of his life, near the end of his life, to Smetana. And he had this weird affliction called tinnitus, where his ears worked, but he had this sound in his ear. It was a very specific sound. It was a very high E. And that's all he could hear. And so he retreated. He no longer conducted. He no longer appeared in public. And he was no longer writing about the Czech people. But he decided he was going to write about himself. So he wrote this piece, My Life, summing up his life as he was retreating because of his deafness. And this is the piece we're going to play for you tonight. It's in 4 movements, and you guys probably know movements are like chapters in a book. There's 4 movements and there's 4 chapters. And we'd like to just maybe take them 2 at a time. We'll play the first 2 movements, and let me just, with my colleagues, introduce you to a few of the ideas in the first 2 movements before we play them. It starts out like this. Going on there. The first thing you might notice, I played this falling phrase, going down. And I think of this as, Smetana talks about this himself, as the "you're going down, chump" motif. Because it was, he says that this was fate talking to him. And the note he goes down to, it's not a coincidence, it's an E. If you go to a higher E, and a higher E, that was the note that afflicted him. And it's like fate telling him, you're going down, and this is just how you're going down. And the other thing going on in this music is he's fighting against it. He's surging upward. You better notice my music kept going up. And so there's this fighting upward against this going down. And Smetana says that he's fighting against fate and he's reaching for something. He has this idea of beauty in his mind and he's reaching for it, and somehow it just stays out of his grasp. We're going to play a passage now where it just seems like there's like this triumph and there's this beauty that he's achieved. And then I want you to listen to what happens to it. Did you notice Lauren had this figure, the cello? Just when it was about to triumph. And what is that but just this ghost of... So right at that moment, fate comes back and says, not so fast there. There's one other passage where you might know at the beginning, at first I was doing the "you're going down," and then later on I was surging up. There's this crazy passage in the middle of the music where it's, in my mind, it's almost like all-out war breaks out. There's this figure, this becomes this crazy distorted, and the violins have this ba-ba-da becomes, instead of just "you're going down," it's going down, going down, going down. And I want you to hear this passage now. It's right in the middle of it's kind of the climax of the movement. So you hear how it's just this battle. Let's talk a little bit about the next movement. And this is very interesting. In quartets and symphonies at this time, there would always be a movement, there was a dance-like movement. And the tradition was to use Austrian-style dances. A minuet, or they'd speed it up and make a scherzo out of it, maybe a waltz. Smetana, no, he was writing Czech music. And his dance is a very Czech dance, a very Czech version of a polka. And it's a very peasant-like polka. It's very sturdy, and I imagine muddy boots. And I think it's relevant to mention at this point that Smetana's father made his living brewing beer. And I think that this shows up here. Smetana says that this movement was a depiction of when he was a young man and the happiness he's had as a young man when he was going to parties and dancing. So these are the first two movements. The first movement is sort of this overview of his struggle against fate. The second movement is this recollection of happy times when he was young and drinking beer and dancing. Smetana, when he described this music, said that it was about his experiences with love in life. And as I said, he was married to this woman that he loved from childhood who tragically died. And although he certainly had intermittent happiness in this part of his life, a lot of things didn't go so well. There was another woman that he very much loved. When he'd gone to Sweden, she was a student of his, but inconveniently she was married to somebody else. So there's, in this slow movement, as a result, well, this is the very beginning. It's very interesting. It starts with just the cello. So when he's talking about his life in love, he starts out alone, which tells you something about it. Things about that beautiful solo. First of all, you might remember the Fate, "You're Going Down" idea. The piece began with. This begins. It's the same music, only it's transformed as in life things get transformed. And the other thing you might have noticed, there was that surging up idea. He had it's the same idea. It's the same, again, this fate and surging against fate. It's still his life. It's still the same person. It's just another chapter in the book. There's a moment in this music where I feel that he really, and I should say that before we play this, I don't think it's a coincidence that when he wrote his most personal music, he wrote it for 2 violins, viola, and cello. Throughout history of classical music, when composers have a big public statement to be done in an auditorium for thousands of people, they'll write an opera, they'll write a symphony, something for an orchestra. But when it's something very, very personal, it's really meant to be done like this, in a very small room, and it was really meant to be done for very intimate friends. Beethoven, at the end of his life, when he was deaf and very much on his own, his most personal statements, some people would argue, and I wouldn't disagree, some of the most beautiful music ever written was Beethoven's last quartets. The last thing his last word in music were string quartets. And I think that, similarly, he wanted this medium, 2 violins, viola, cello, a quartet, to stuff that was so personal and so painful that it was almost too much to make it public. And in this next thing, you'll hear us playing these chords, bam, ba, ba, and they just radiate pain. And then there's a part where it's like the emotion is too much for him physically to contain, and he calls on all of us to play 3 notes at the same time. We're going, and I want you to hear just a little bit of this passage now. It's pretty intense music. Just a couple words about the last one before we get to it. In this, he depicts when his life was in triumph, when his great Czech music had really made him a hero to the Czech people, which he still is. And the first thing we'll play is this very joyous melody, which has this bump, bump, bucket up rhythm, which is a very characteristic Czech melody. And he's showing that, yeah, with the rhythms of my people, I was really able to express myself and achieve something and be highly regarded. So let's just listen to this great tune. So, and then this tune comes back at the end, only now it's frenzied. It's much faster, and it's almost like he feels like he's running out of time. And then there's this incredible climactic moment, and I'm not going to tell you what it depicts. I think you might, from what I've already said, you might figure it out. He is actually depicting his own deafness. That was the note that was torturing his hearing. And the piece sort of ends, he describes it as finding some measure of hope to go on, and it's very ambiguous to me. I mean, I guess you could hear optimism in it, but it's not real easy to hear. And it's like the end, he's like struggling to find a sort of peace. So let's play these two movements for you now. The third movement, the depiction of his experiences in love, and then this his triumph and well, his deafness.
me now, listening to something like that in such an intimate setting. Thank you so much. It was beautiful. The whole story of this band's life, the whole thing is fantastic.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you have to rush out of here. The quartet will be hanging out for a little bit, and we have some wine and water and lemonade up there. Feel free to hang out and maybe ask any questions these young budding musicians we have about. Okay? Feel free to ask them any questions. All right? Thanks so much again for coming.
That really suited my